Do you ever find yourself feeling bad about your drawings? Something doesn't feel quite right, but you have no idea where it went wrong? Because I certainly do, and it can get very discouraging over time. Today, I'd like to talk about an important skill to learn when drawing, especially if you're a beginner artist. So what is it? It's line confidence. Hi, I'm Wind, and I make emotes and other streaming assets for commissions and my Etsy store. If you ever made emotes yourself before, you will understand the importance of line confidence. Emotes are tiny pictures, usually under 256 pixels. Hence, the lines we draw will need to be intentional and confident to capture the emotion we want to portray. Let's start off easy by answering, what is line confidence? Simply put, it is knowing where and how to draw lines to achieve your goals. For example, if you knew how to draw a realistic dog, you wouldn't spend time wondering if he had 4 or 6 legs. Similarly, if you have line confidence, there'll be lesser hesitation and better line economy. A common beginner phenomenon happens when we draw many lines to represent one singular line. This is often called hairy lines or chicken scratch. Of course, it isn't bad in itself, as how you draw lines can be part of your stylization. However, the concern arises when we are using hairy lines to escape our discomfort of the fear of decisive line making. Let's compare a sketch of an apple. I drew both of them. One is hairy and one is clean. While both represent an apple, it's easier to spot any mistakes that I might have made with clean lines because hairy lines allows us to guess where the line should have been. By always relying on hairy lines to insinuate where the major line should be, we are giving in to our fear for failure. Indeed, it is freaking scary for others to see our mistakes. Oftentimes, we ourselves might lack the confidence or never drew a certain thing before. So how do we expect ourselves to naturally gather the courage to be decisive? The magical thing is, it's okay to fail. All master artists have failed. The only difference between them and us is that they have failed more. So today, I'll share with you what has helped me gain line confidence over time, and eventually, you too will reach a stage where your lines themselves will be beautiful to you, even without color. Part 1. References. Everyone says it's important to learn how to still as an artist. And I guess it's true. One of the best ways to gain line confidence is to observe how others draw their lines. This can be found in speed paints or even sketches that are found on sites like Pinterest. Some points of observation you can do are: number 1, how thick or thin are the lines? Does it change based on location or the subject? For example, some artists may use a tapered brush and others may use a consistent line brush. This sort of choices will affect how the line is drawn, whether it goes from thick to a thin point, or it stays consistent throughout. Similarly, different artists may also choose to vary their line thickness for objects in the foreground or the background. In the case of emotes, it is often expected that we thicken the outer border of the image to help it stand out. Secondly, another question you can ask yourself is, does the artist vary their opacity? Does the line quality or impression change based on how light or dark the line transitions into? The opacity of a line has multiple effects on how a line is perceived. For one, if two lines are placed side by side, obviously the darker line will stand out more than the lighter one. So in a singular line, the darker part will also catch more attention. Moreover, opacity can also hint at lighting and shadow without a need for color. For example, if I put a ball on the table, the part that touches the table directly would not receive light. Hence, it would make sense to draw a darker line compared to the top of the ball, which probably bounces off light. And this is assuming we are only going to draw the outline of the ball. Lastly, we can also analyze how artists clean up their messy sketches. By doing so, we are looking directly at the thinking process of the artist. How do they figure out what parts of the lines should be kept and what is unnecessary? When we start off as beginner artists, these kind of decisions can be extremely intimidating. Watching skilled artists do them will help give us an approximation of what and how it can be done. So now that we've talked about what and how we can observe other people's line art and sketches, we should also touch upon the importance of using references for subjects that you plan to draw. If it's the first time you're drawing a frog, why torture yourself and try to recall what a frog is? Simply look for a ton of frog images and then do your best to do the following. Number 1. Are there common features to your subject? Things like how many legs a frog has might be common sense, but some other things are a little less straightforward, like how does the curve of a frog's head impact its cuteness? You can experiment with different types of lines to give that curved impression. This will set you apart from your fellow artists because everyone draws their curves differently. Next, really pay attention to the reference and avoid symbolism. It's easy to fall into the comforts of assuming we know what we are drawing. I know a frog has 4 legs, but that doesn't mean I know what kind of lines to draw to represent these 4 legs. So spending the extra 5 minutes just looking and analyzing will improve your odds of success. Now, let's move on to the second part of the lesson. Part 2. Learning how to be intentional and decisive with lines. Oh, that was a long title. The next exercise we can do to improve line confidence is CSI lines. I'm sure many of you have heard of the C-curve, S-curve, and the straight line. Most if not all things can be represented with just these 3 lines. So why is sticking to just these 3 lines good for learning intentionality? Well, there are multiple reasons. First, being limited encourages exploration. It sounds a little contradicting, but let me explain. Have you ever heard of the idea that if you gave someone 5 different foods to eat, it's harder to decide than if you only gave them 2? When we are faced with too many options, we often experience decision fatigue. This happens when we get too overwhelmed at what is possible. At the same time, we get frustrated that we don't have perfect information on hand to make the 100% best decision at that moment. Hence, if we can only draw it with 3 different kind of lines, it becomes more like a multiple choice question. It's no longer a I don't know what's best for this line, and instead it's more of like I still don't know, but at least I can practice decisiveness from the limited options given to me. This means we no longer settle because we are overwhelmed. The power that comes from always choosing your lines is that you control your lines and your lines don't control you. Secondly, using CSI lines teaches you to simplify. Anyone who has left their house knows that nature doesn't naturally come with line art. We learn as artists to draw lines first to give an impression of the object, and then eventually we use lines to hint at the multi-dimensionality of a being. Hence, using CSI lines will force us to simplify a complex being into lines that are easier to digest. Following that, we will also gradually have the courage and strength to exaggerate features later on. Now let's do an exercise together with CSI lines. I'm gonna use an apple again here. We all know apples are usually curvy at the sides and yet they can appear quite squarish. So I've used a reference picture so we all know what fruit I'm talking about, and I did a quick sketch of how different lines can make the same object feel different. Which do you think has the best kind of line for an apple? Personally, I really enjoy how blocky and angular the apple became when I drew it with only straight lines. But it's also easy to observe how different lines tell different stories, and my apple made of S-curves looks kind of odd, an alien apple perhaps. Most of the time, we would be using a combination of lines. The fun part of mixing CSI lines is that with variety, we give viewers something exciting to see. It also makes us ask ourselves, why did I choose to put that straight line at the bottom of my apple when I could have easily chose a C-curve that would have looked nicer to my own eyes? The reason I chose a straight line is because I wanted to break up the monotony of all the curves in my apple. Figuring out such questions helps you get to know yourself and your quirks better. In fact, you'll often find yourself gravitating towards certain art-making decisions, and over time, all these decisions will compound themselves into your own style. Part 3. Trust yourself. This is the last part of the lesson, and perhaps the one thing I want you to remember if you can only remember one thing. Hesitant lines betray our self-confidence. If we hesitate, viewers can also feel it if not consciously. Hesitation can come in many different forms: hairy lines, lines that shake, ends of lines that hook back despite us not wanting them to, and so on. To combat hesitation, all you have to do is continue the motion of your line. But what does that even mean? Have you ever drawn line art and found yourself redrawing the same line over and over again? That no matter how many times you draw it, the line bends halfway despite it appearing seemingly perfect at the start. This is often because we rush into our lines, and when we do execute the motion of drawing itself, we might lose confidence halfway and try to change the direction mid-line. So how do we solve this? I think the best exercise is to learn line ghosting. Essentially, try to draw a line that connects two dots and make sure not to deviate halfway. If you practice for a little bit, you eventually build up the confidence to not only trust yourself, but also learn to draw confident lines that can close gaps between different lines. It might sometimes be boring to do such practices, but learning to trust yourself is a lifelong journey. That is all I have to share about improving line confidence today. I hope the video is useful to you thus far. I want to emphasize that art is a skill that takes time. As long as you try your best, it is enough. Finally, let me mention my Etsy store. I do art commissions and sell pre-made, ready-to-use streaming assets like emotes, overlays, and more on my Etsy. I would greatly appreciate if you want to support me via those channels. If not, a like and subscribe would be wonderful and help contribute to my future art videos. As always, be safe and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye!